They left me alone in that hospital room, tubes still in my arms, legs limp beneath a thin blanket. "You're not our problem anymore," my mother said as she walked out. "You ever wonder what it feels like to be discarded by the people who raised you? I didn't just lose the ability to walk. I lost my place in the only family I ever knew. But here's the thing they didn't count on. I wasn't done. Not yet. If you think this story ends with me broken, think again. Because when they buried me, they forgot. I was a seed, and I'm about to bloom where they hoped I'd die." The photograph still hangs in my parents' living room, framed in gold, smiling faces frozen in time. To anyone else, it looks perfect. My father's hand on my shoulder, my mother's arm wrapped protectively around me, my sister leaning close with that practiced grin. But when I stare at it long enough, I see the truth. My father's eyes are elsewhere, distracted. My sister's smile is a weapon disguised as affection. And my mother, her gaze is cold, sharp, detached, like she's standing in a room full of strangers she'd rather not claim. On the night of my 36th birthday, they gathered for dinner as if we were a family stitched together by love. My sister Vanessa brought a cake she didn't bake. My father retold jokes he'd repeated for years, and my mother insisted I sit at the center of the table, smiling, as though this night proved we were united. Yet in the middle of all that laughter, I felt something hollow gnawing inside me. Have you ever smiled because you're expected to, not because you want to? That's how it felt. Like I was acting in a play I never auditioned for. I excused myself after dessert and wandered into the hallway. That was when I saw it, my mother's little leather notebook left on the console table. It was half hidden beneath a stack of magazines, its edges frayed from years of use. I should have walked away, but curiosity pulled me in. I opened it and flipped through the pages. Inside, there were lists, my siblings' names, followed by bullet points like, "too impulsive," "needs constant praise," "easily manipulated." Then I saw my name. Rachel. Emotionally unstable. My stomach turned. All those times she told me I was sensitive, dramatic, overthinking. They weren't slips of the tongue. They were rehearsed judgments, etched into her private record like evidence she was building against me. My hand shook as I turned to the next page. At the bottom, scrawled in ink darker than the rest, I read a line that made my breath catch. "She won't survive what's coming." I closed the notebook and shoved it back under the magazines just as footsteps echoed in the hall. My sister's voice called, "Rachel, you okay?" I forced a smile when I returned to the table, but the words burned in my mind. She won't survive what's coming. Days later, the accident happened. A truck swerved through a red light and slammed into the side of my car. The world went black, and when I woke again, I was lying in a hospital bed, machines beeping steadily around me, legs heavy and useless beneath the blanket. My throat ached, my chest burned, and the first thing I heard was my mother's voice. Not words of comfort, not relief that I was alive. She looked me in the eye and said, "You remember to pay the hospital bill, don't you?" I thought I misheard her, that the medication blurred her meaning. But when I looked at her face, stern and impatient, I realized she wasn't joking. Vanessa swooped in next, her perfume sharp in the sterile room. "Don't worry, sis," she said, flashing her easy smile. "I'll handle the paperwork for you. You just sign here so I can talk to the insurance company on your behalf." She slid the forms onto my tray table, pen already uncapped. My fingers trembled as I scrawled my name, desperate to believe she wanted to help. But in her eyes, I caught something else. Calculation. The days blurred. My parents visited sparingly, often leaving quickly with excuses of errands or appointments. Nurses tended to me more than my own blood did. I began to notice patterns. My mother only asked about money. My sister always pressed for signatures. My father remained silent, drifting in and out like a shadow. One afternoon, I overheard 2 doctors talking outside my room. "It's good she has family support," one said. I almost laughed. Support? The only thing my family supported was their own convenience. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. While scrolling through my medical records on the hospital's shared tablet, I noticed something odd. My parents had employer-backed insurance, comprehensive, covering accidents fully. I confronted my mother about it during her next visit. Her lips thinned, eyes darting. "That policy doesn't apply to you anymore," she said flatly. "You're on your own." I knew she was lying. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling tiles, I heard Vanessa's voice drifting through the half-open door. She was on the phone, her tone low and conspiratorial. "She's weaker than we thought," she whispered. "Start the transfer." My heart pounded so loud I feared it would set off the machines. Transfer what? Money? Property? Or something darker I hadn't yet considered? The words replayed in my mind until morning, each echo carving deeper into my chest. I was trapped in their golden cage, gilded on the outside, rotting within. And for the first time, I wondered if survival meant breaking out entirely. When I was discharged from the hospital, my parents insisted I stay with them just until you're steady again. At first, I wanted to believe it was kindness. They carried my bags into the old bedroom where I once studied for high school exams, where posters of bands had long since been stripped from the walls. The room smelled of dust and mothballs, as though time had been sealed inside with the blinds. I noticed something immediately. There was no lock on the door, no call bell, no modifications to help me move in a wheelchair. It felt less like a safe haven and more like confinement. The first night home, my mother placed a pill organizer on the dresser. "I'll keep track of your medications," she said crisply, but more often than not, she forgot. I would have to remind her, and sometimes she brushed me off with a wave, saying, "It's not that serious. You can wait." Each missed dose left me weaker, foggier, like I was dissolving into the shadows of that room. Vanessa was no better. She offered to drive me to physical therapy, but hours before each appointment, she would text, "Something came up. Family first, right?" My father kept quiet, slipping in only to drop off mail or nod awkwardly, as though he were a tenant rather than a parent. Days stretched into weeks, and I realized the house had grown colder, not by temperature, but by intention. One evening, while trying to find something to read, I rummaged through the drawer of the desk that had once been mine. At the back, beneath a pile of receipts, I found a sealed envelope. It wasn't addressed to me, but to Longleaf Nursing Facility. The return date stamped in the corner was 3 months before the accident. My breath caught. I ripped it open. Inside was an application, already filled out with my personal information. The boxes checked: permanent residency, dependent adult, no financial independence. My hands trembled as I held the letter. 3 months before the accident, my mother had prepared to send me away. Before I even lost my ability to walk, she had already envisioned me locked in a nursing home. What if my family's love was just, well rehearsed? I couldn't sleep that night. The walls seemed to pulse with betrayal. Every laugh I remembered from our dinners, every "we're proud of you," echoed now as rehearsed lines in a cruel play. I needed proof, something undeniable. So I waited until the house went quiet, then wheeled myself into the hallway. The floorboards creaked like they were warning me to turn back, but I pushed forward until I reached my parents' bedroom. Inside, I searched quickly, heart pounding. In the bottom drawer of my father's desk, I found a stack of papers bound with a rubber band. At the top, bold black letters stared back at me. Power of attorney, emergency execution. My name was listed beneath, along with Vanessa's, marked as the sole executor of my finances and medical decisions. The edges of my vision blurred. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had legally erased me. The next morning, I overheard my mother chatting with a neighbor through the open kitchen window. "We've sacrificed everything for Rachel," she said in a tone dripping with martyrdom. "But we deserve our lives back. She'll be better off in professional care." The neighbor murmured sympathy, probably believing the story. Later that week, Vanessa hosted a party. Cars lined the driveway, music pulsed through the walls, and the smell of grilled meat drifted under my door. I wasn't invited. My wheelchair couldn't even fit past the clutter they'd stacked in the hallway. I sat in my room, listening to the laughter rise and fall like waves crashing against a shore I'd never reach. When I tried to open the door, I found it stuck. Someone had slid a chair against the outside knob. Hours passed. My throat was dry, my stomach hollow, but no one checked on me. By midnight, when the music finally died down, I realized I wasn't family to them anymore. I was an obstacle, a burden, an inconvenience to be hidden away when company came. The final fracture came from the one person I thought might still care. My younger brother, Michael. He had once been my closest ally, sneaking me out for ice cream when Mom was in one of her moods. One afternoon, I heard him in the kitchen with Vanessa. His voice was sharp but hushed. "So I get my share too, right? You promised." Vanessa's laugh was like glass breaking. "Of course. Dad already signed over the land. You'll get your cut once the sale goes through." The pit in my stomach widened. Even Michael had joined them. The family I once believed was fractured was, in truth, united. Just not with me. Against me. That night, as I lay awake, I heard voices from the living room. My mother's phone was on speaker, her voice unusually brisk. "It's done. She can't take us to court if she can't walk." I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the beat of my heart like a trapped bird. They weren't just planning for my dependence. They were counting on it. My disability wasn't a tragedy to them. It was a strategy. And for the first time, I understood the truth. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was their scapegoat, their sacrifice, their leverage. The fall happened on a rainy afternoon. I had wheeled myself toward the window to catch a glimpse of the storm when the chair caught on the edge of the rug. In an instant, I pitched forward, hitting the floor with a dull crack. Pain exploded through my side. I cried out, again and again, my voice hoarse from screaming. The house was silent except for the muffled sound of the television downstairs. No one came. Minutes stretched into an hour, my body twisted awkwardly on the hardwood. At last, a neighbor, concerned by the noise, forced the door open. She gasped at the sight of me, called an ambulance, and rode with me to the hospital. My parents never showed. Lying in the sterile white room, I stared at the ceiling tiles until a nurse placed a thin envelope on my tray. "This came in for you," she said softly. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were my latest bank statements. The balance read 0. I flipped through the pages, heart pounding. Transfers had been made. Large sums drained systematically over the last few weeks. Attached was a printed email thread, supposedly from me, authorizing the transfers and consenting to give full control to Vanessa. But I had never written those words. I demanded to see the hospital social worker. She pulled up the legal documents. My mother had filed a petition declaring me incapacitated and unfit to make independent decisions. The court had granted her guardianship without my knowledge, legitimizing every theft. My own identity had been used as a weapon against me. The betrayal hollowed me out. It wasn't just the money or the property. It was the fact that my mother had declared me legally absent while I was still breathing. She had erased me from my own life. As I lay there, numb, a nurse slipped me another envelope, this one unmarked. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typewritten words. They planned this before the crash. My vision blurred. Before the crash. The accident that had stolen my legs, my independence. Was it truly an accident? I wanted answers, but the weight of despair pressed down like an anchor. Nights became endless. I wrote a letter on the hospital's notepad, each word scratched out with tears. If just one person truly loved me, I would stay, but no one does. I folded it neatly, set it on the bedside table, and stared at the IV line running into my arm. Dark thoughts crept closer. I imagined slipping away quietly, no longer a burden, no longer a pawn. My breathing slowed as I rehearsed it in my mind. And then, by chance, my finger brushed against the hospital radio. A familiar voice spilled into the room, calm, warm, steady. It was a podcast playing on the local station, the host sharing her story about surviving a narcissistic family that had disowned her. Her words cut through the fog. "I was told I was nothing," the voice said, trembling but fierce. "But the truth is, they feared the part of me that couldn't be broken. That light, once ignited, can never be extinguished." Recognition jolted me. That voice belonged to Ms. Carter, my high school English teacher. She was the one who had once handed me a book of poetry and whispered, "Rachel, you are light. Don't ever let them convince you otherwise." Hearing her now, sharing her survival, felt like a lifeline tossed into the abyss. I sobbed into my pillow, not because I was broken, but because I wasn't alone. Her story tethered me back to the world. The words I had written in my suicide note shifted inside me. Maybe someone had loved me once. Maybe someone still believed I was more than what my family decided I was. That night, instead of ending my life, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness like a lighthouse. My hands trembled as I typed the first words. If I die, they win. So I'll write. The act of pressing those keys felt like breathing again. My pain hadn't vanished, but it had a direction now. I wasn't ready to forgive and I wasn't ready to forget, but I was ready to fight in the only way I could, by telling the truth they had tried to bury. The first time I pressed post, I expected silence. Maybe a handful of comments from strangers offering shallow encouragement before my story sank into the endless noise of the internet. But within hours, my notifications lit up like wildfire. 1,000 shares, 10,000 comments, people tagging their friends and whispering, "This is my life too." By the end of the second day, my story had reached over 1 million views. I had written everything as raw as it lived inside me. The notebook labeling me emotionally unstable. The hospital signatures I never gave, the words that still burned. "You're not our problem anymore." I wrote it not for sympathy, but because silence had been their weapon. And I was done being silent. The responses came faster than I could read them. Some were survivors like me, pouring their hearts out in messages long enough to be novels. Others sent files, emails, recordings, testimonies about the ways my family had quietly hurt them too. A former babysitter confessed how my mother had underpaid and humiliated her. A cousin admitted my father had used threats to seize a piece of inheritance. Strangers who had once admired the perfect Morgan family began to send me questions. Was it all a lie? One message stopped me cold. It was from an attorney named Daniel Cooper. His subject line read, "We've met before." When I opened it, I saw his face in the attachment. Older now, gray hair replacing dark, but I recognized him from childhood birthdays. He had once been my father's best friend. In his email, he wrote, "Rachel, I know what they did. I couldn't speak before, but I can now. If you're willing, I'll represent you. No fees. I owe you that much." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. The same man my father had toasted at family dinners was now offering to help dismantle the empire my parents had built. The irony was almost too sharp to swallow. Still, it was the first time in months I felt like someone was truly on my side. That night, another file appeared in my inbox. No name, no introduction, just a folder marked, "Play Me." Against my better judgment, I clicked. Out crackled a familiar voice, my mother's. "She was always disposable," she said flatly, as though discussing trash rather than her own daughter. "We only needed her until she could no longer hold her own. Now she's just excess." My hand clamped over my mouth. Disposable. The word seared through me like fire. I couldn't cry anymore. There were no tears left. What rose instead was fury, clean and sharp, a blade forged in betrayal. I began to plan. If they had spent years building a mask, I would tear it off piece by piece. I called it Project Backfire. Every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every lie told to neighbors and friends, I would expose them all. Daniel helped me draw a roadmap: legal filings, subpoenas, evidence preservation. Meanwhile, I began the public battle. I set up a small camera in my hospital room, filming my physical therapy. The footage was raw. Me straining to lift one foot, collapsing after 3 shaky steps, gasping through tears. But I spliced those images with narration of my family's betrayal. Viewers didn't just hear my pain, they saw it, and they responded. Each upload drew hundreds of thousands of views, comments of outrage, donations for legal fees, letters from strangers saying, "You gave me courage." One afternoon, an unexpected message arrived in my inbox. It was from my cousin Emily. She had always been quiet at family gatherings, always watching from the sidelines. Now she wrote, "I can't keep their secrets anymore. Attached are documents from Dad's files, your mother and Vanessa's correspondence with their lawyer, proof of forged signatures, property transfers, everything. Use them. They deserve to fall." I opened the attachments with shaking hands. Dozens of scanned documents glared back at me, all in their handwriting. Their careful planning was now mine to wield. Emily had crossed the line they never expected anyone in the family to cross. That night, as I cataloged each file, my email pinged again. The subject line read, "Your story matters." It was from a major news network. The body of the message was short, but life-altering. "We want to tell your story. Prime time." I leaned back in my hospital bed, the glow of the screen lighting my face. For the first time since the crash, I felt the balance shift. The power they had stolen was beginning to slip from their grasp and return to mine. The phoenix was stirring. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and old paper, the kind of place where lives are dissected into evidence and signatures. I wheeled myself through the double doors, Daniel at my side, a folder thick with proof balanced on his lap. For months, I had gathered every scrap. Emails, forged documents, bank transfers, and most damning of all, the recordings of my mother's voice calling me disposable. My journal entries, once a desperate attempt to stay alive, were now evidence too, a living chronicle of betrayal. When we filed the complaint, the news spread instantly. Social media turned into a battlefield. Clips of me struggling to walk with a steel frame, tears streaming down my face, went viral. Hashtag Stash Still Not Your Problem trended nationwide, millions of strangers echoing the words that once nearly destroyed me. The world was watching now, and for the first time, the shame belonged to them, not to me. The trial loomed like a storm, but my family began unraveling even before the first hearing. Vanessa, my sister, fled across state lines. Reports said she emptied a joint account and vanished, leaving behind only silence and a trail of debt. My mother, furious and desperate, called a press conference outside her church. She stood at the podium, voice trembling with rehearsed indignation, declaring, "My daughter suffers from severe mental illness. She imagines abuse where none exists. She needs treatment, not a courtroom." But the words rang hollow. By then, the recordings were public, the documents circulating online. Neighbors who once admired our family facade turned their backs. Donations poured into my legal fund, strangers writing, "Don't stop. You speak for all of us who were silenced." I thought I had seen every betrayal, every twist, but one night the phone rang in Daniel's office. He handed it to me, his brow furrowed. On the other end was a voice I hadn't heard in months, my father's. "Rachel," he said quietly, almost broken, "I want to testify. I should have done it long ago. They'll destroy me too, but I can't watch this lie go on." My throat tightened. My father, the silent shadow, finally choosing a side. The hearings moved swiftly once the evidence was laid out. Judge, jury, and spectators alike sat stiff as Daniel projected the emails across the courtroom wall. Signatures forged in my name. Property deeds transferred under the guise of my incapacity. And finally, the recording of my mother. She was always disposable. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother shrank in her chair, face pale, hands shaking. When my father took the stand, he spoke haltingly, each word weighted with years of cowardice. He admitted he had signed documents he knew were false, pressured by my mother and Vanessa. He admitted he had looked the other way when I begged for help. "I thought silence would keep the peace," he said, voice cracking, "but it only kept her prisoner." The verdict came down like thunder. The judge ruled in my favor. Every stolen asset was to be restored, and my mother faced charges of fraud and perjury. Vanessa was declared a fugitive. My father walked out of the courtroom a hollow man, stripped of the little dignity he had clung to. The wider family fractured too. Aunts and uncles cut ties with my parents. Cousins who once idolized them now whispered disgust. the golden facade shattered. What remained was rubble. I thought that would be the end, that justice had been served. But the story had one more twist waiting in the shadows. Weeks after the trial, as I sat in my hospital bed drafting a new journal entry, a nurse handed me an envelope. The handwriting on the front was delicate, unfamiliar. Inside was a letter written in a trembling hand. Rachel, I am your mother. Your real mother. You were switched at birth. I searched for you, but they told me you had died. Only now have I found the truth. Please, I beg you, look at the photograph enclosed. That is me, holding you, the day you were born. My fingers shook as I pulled out the faded photo. A young woman with my same eyes, my same smile, cradling a newborn swaddled in white. My breath caught in my chest. Everything I had endured, every cruelty, every betrayal, suddenly twisted into a new shape. If this letter was true, then the family I had fought against wasn't mine at all. I stared at the photo until tears blurred the image. My whole life had been lived inside a lie, a script written before I even took my first breath. My whole life, I whispered into the quiet, was never mine. The house I once thought I'd lost forever stood gleaming under the late spring sun, its windows thrown open, curtains fluttering with fresh air. Months ago, it had been stripped from me by forged signatures and greed. Now it was mine again, but not as a prize to hoard. I wanted the walls to hold a different kind of story. That was why rows of folding chairs lined the living room, cameras perched on tripods, and a banner stretched across the mantel read, Chosen Family Conference, Healing Beyond Blood. People filled the room, survivors, allies, strangers who had followed my journey online. They came not to see a victim, but to witness proof that survival could be loud, messy, and real. When I took the microphone, I felt my legs trembling against the braces, the room hushed in expectation. I won't tell you that healing is clean, I began. It isn't a straight line. It's jagged. Some days you'll feel whole. Other days you'll want to disappear again. I won't sugarcoat it. But I stand here because I refused to let their silence define me, and you can too. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, some crying openly. I saw faces lift with recognition, the way I had once felt when I heard my teacher's podcast, when her story kept me alive. Now I was that voice for them. As I spoke, I shared everything. The notebook labeling me unstable, the nights locked in my room while laughter roared downstairs, the betrayal in court, even the revelation that I may not have been their daughter at all. I didn't spare the ugly parts. Healing isn't about hiding scars. It's about showing them so others know they aren't alone. Halfway through the event, as I paused for questions, I noticed movement at the back. A woman stepped into the light, her hair streaked with silver, her hands trembling as she clutched a folded photograph to her chest. My breath caught. It was the woman from the faded picture, the one who had written me the letter. The crowd turned as she walked forward, her eyes brimming with tears. When she reached me, she extended the photo, her voice breaking. Rachel, I'm your mother. Your real mother. Gasps filled the room, cameras clicking furiously, but in that moment, the world blurred. I took the photo from her hand, studied the younger version of her face pressed against mine as an infant. The resemblance was undeniable. My knees weakened. She reached for me hesitantly, afraid I might pull away. But I didn't. I fell into her arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt held without condition. We wept together in the silence of 100 witnesses. When I pulled back, I turned to the audience. My voice shook, but my conviction was steel. If you could rewrite your family, what would you keep? The room buzzed with murmurs, some faces breaking into smiles, others reflecting the weight of the question. It wasn't rhetorical. It was an invitation. That night, after the conference, I sat alone in the living room, the same place where once I had been silenced. The banner still hung across the mantel, a reminder that the narrative belonged to me now. I didn't crave applause or revenge anymore. What I wanted was peace. Quiet mornings, honest laughter, chosen love. I began drafting my book in those days, titling it Born Twice. It wasn't just about the accident, or the trial, or the reunion with the woman who had given me life. It was about the rebirth I carved for myself, step by step, out of betrayal's ashes. I wrote about despair, yes, but also about fire, resilience, and the way truth reshapes even the deepest wounds. The chapters poured out of me like exhaled breath, and soon a publisher called. They believed the world needed my story, raw as it was. I agreed only on one condition. Nothing would be edited to make my family look kinder or me weaker. No sanitizing, no fairy tale. The truth was the only redemption I had. Weeks later, I filmed a short video to announce the book. I sat outside in the garden, the evening light painting the grass gold, the rebuilt house standing strong behind me. My braces glinted as I shifted forward in the chair. I looked directly into the lens. I was never the problem, I said, a small smile breaking across my face. I was the truth they feared. I pressed upload, closed the laptop, and let the cool air wash over me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to brace for betrayal. My story belonged to me. My life belonged to me, and that was enough.